She entered the first-class cabin wearing a gray sweater and sweatpants, but she was humiliated and kicked out. They didn't know that her billionaire husband owned the entire airline, and what happened next shocked them all. The morning light poured across the polished floors of Phoenix Sky Terminal, casting long golden lines through towering glass as Camila Rhodes moved through the gates with that same quiet confidence she had worn since childhood. The kind that wasn't taught but sharpened over years of being underestimated, questioned, and surveilled in places where her skin tone arrived before she did, her posture upright yet unassuming, dressed in a dark gray sweatshirt and light gray sweatpants, her braided hair tucked beneath a plain black cap, no makeup, no jewelry save for a slim silver bracelet passed down from her grandmother, a woman who used to say, "You don't have to dress like power to walk like it." And while Camila was now the wife of Nathan Rhodes, billionaire and majority owner of Orion Air, her preference remained unbent. Commercial flights, no entourage, no private jet, just her and the masses, where the real temperature of society still lingered in glances, pauses, and policy. She stood in line at Gate B22 holding a paper coffee cup from a small terminal cafe where she had tipped in cash and smiled politely when asked if she was headed somewhere fun, replying simply, "Charlotte, family," without explanation. Without revealing that the family celebration was her parents' 40th anniversary, or that her husband had offered a private jet twice and she had declined both times. Because while Nathan meant well, Camila believed in reminders. The kind of reminders you only get when people don't know who you are, don't expect you to be anyone, and feel completely comfortable treating you as less than, because you don't look the part. When the boarding call came, now boarding first-class passengers for Orion Air Flight 218 to Charlotte, Camila Rhodes adjusted the strap on her worn canvas backpack and approached the lane. Aware of how the woman ahead of her in designer heels glanced back and then quickly forward, and how the man behind her took a second look at her sweatshirt, then at her seat designation, then at her again with a flicker of confusion. The kind she'd cataloged in airports for decades, where her dark skin and low-profile clothing inevitably collided with others' ideas of status and legitimacy. "Boarding pass, please," said the gate agent, a young white woman whose rehearsed smile dimmed slightly as she registered the mismatch between the seat 2A, first class, and the traveler in front of her, whose outfit didn't scream premium, whose shoes weren't leather, whose hair wasn't ironed or glossed, and whose presence was, in a word, unexpected. Camila handed over her phone with practiced ease, the smile on her face unfazed and unmoved, because she had seen this moment before, had lived it in offices, elevators, hotel lobbies, gala doors. Everywhere people filtered their welcome through the lens of appearance. The agent scanned the pass, paused for a beat longer than necessary, then looked back at her and forced the smile back into position. "Thank you, Ms. Rhodes," she said with a voice just a shade too high. "Enjoy your flight." Camila nodded, walked through the lane, and stepped down the jet bridge with the awareness that the first challenge was done but not over, because judgment rarely ended at the gate. Inside the first-class cabin of Orion Air Flight 218, the interior gleamed with sterile elegance. Navy blue leather seats spaced apart like islands, polished brass accents, linen headrest covers, and glass flutes half-filled with complimentary champagne, each placed carefully beside the armrests as symbols of distinction. And as Camila stepped through the threshold, she caught the moment a flight attendant's smile stiffened, the polite expression faltering in real time as if buffering against surprise. "Good morning," Camila offered gently, her voice calm but unreadable, her eyes already scanning the name tag. "Tracy Miles." Tracy blinked once, then said, "First class is to the left," not with cruelty, but with that specific tone that came from disbelief poorly disguised as confusion. "Yes, I know," Camila replied without changing her stride, her eyes brushing past Tracy to the galley where another attendant, a white man named Logan Price, peeked out and glanced at her, then leaned subtly toward a third crew member, Yvette Langston, whose badge read lead cabin attendant, and murmured something low enough to be secret but visible enough to be intentional. Camila continued toward her assigned seat, 2A by the window, and noticed how the suited man in 2B watched her quietly as she stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment, his brow furrowing slightly as if he too was trying to do the math of how a black woman in sweatpants had ended up in the seat beside him, and while he said nothing, his silence wasn't neutral, it was curious. And curiosity in first class always meant suspicion when it came dressed in brown skin and cotton. She sat down, exhaled, and pulled a battered copy of The Fire Next Time from her bag, flipping to a dog-eared page as Logan reappeared at her side with a posture that said official inquiry. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even but clipped. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Camila looked up slowly, keeping the page open with one hand as she presented the phone with the other, displaying her seat. 2A, first class. Logan stared at the screen, then at her face, then back at the screen, before giving a slow nod and muttering, "One moment," before turning sharply and walking toward the front, where he joined Tracy and Yvette in whispered conversation, their eyes darting in Camila's direction with the kind of synchronized glances that didn't need sound to be understood. Camila closed her book and stared ahead, the corner of her mouth twitching not with anger but recognition, because the moment was never new, only recycled in new uniforms and policy wrappers, and while nothing had yet been said aloud about her race, it was everywhere in the air, like static waiting to snap. She kept her gaze fixed on the seat ahead, her back straight but not rigid, her expression calm but not complacent, knowing full well what was coming next, and sure enough, just moments later, the lead flight attendant, Yvette Langston, tall, pressed, and rehearsed, approached with Logan at her side, her clipboard clutched in one hand like a shield, her voice polite but edged with something that felt far too sharp for protocol. "Ms. Rhodes," she began, glancing briefly at the phone in Camila's hand and then immediately back up. "We're experiencing a minor seating discrepancy in our system and just need to confirm a few details before takeoff." Camila didn't move. "There's no discrepancy," she said evenly. "You've already scanned my boarding pass. Twice." Yvette's smile tightened. "Yes, of course, but unfortunately our records still show that seat 2A is registered under a different last name, C. Rhodes, no first name on file, and we just need to verify for compliance purposes." Camila tilted her head slightly. "So what's the issue? That I match the seat number, or that I don't match the image of the person you expected to see in it?" That question hit with a precision that stalled Yvette for half a second, just long enough for Logan to interject. "It's just standard procedure, ma'am. We've had situations." "Let me guess," Camila cut in, "you've had issues with people sneaking into first class in sweatpants and dark skin?" A few heads turned. One woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably and pretended to return to her magazine, though her eyes remained fixed on the unfolding scene, while the older man in 2C furrowed his brow in quiet disapproval and watched more directly now, as if sensing this wasn't just a misunderstanding but something deeper, something practiced. "We're not implying anything, Ms. Rhodes," Yvette said, though her voice now carried a brittle edge, "but you must understand, we have protocols to maintain the integrity of the premium cabin experience." "The integrity of the cabin," Camila repeated slowly, "is compromised by bias, not by a black woman with a valid ticket." Yvette opened her mouth, then closed it. Logan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Tracy, watching from near the galley, said nothing, but her eyes flicked to the service panel like she was already wondering how this report would be worded later. "I've flown first class before," Camila continued, her voice calm but carrying weight now, "but I've never been asked to show ID on board. I've never seen white men in hoodies or joggers pulled aside like this. I've seen them handed mimosas before their bags were even stowed. But me? I get interrogated." "Ms. Rhodes," Logan said again, trying for a gentler tone but failing to mask his discomfort, "if you could just provide a form of identification, we'll be happy to resolve this." "No," Camila said flatly, "because the only thing that needs resolving is your assumptions. You've scanned my boarding pass. I'm sitting in the correct seat. I don't owe you anything else." The silence that followed hung thick and tense. Other passengers in the cabin were no longer pretending not to listen. Some glanced at each other, others at the crew. One man raised his phone as if considering recording, then lowered it again. The social stakes had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Yvette leaned slightly toward Logan and murmured something too low for Camila to hear, then turned back with a hardened tone. "Ma'am, if you can't verify your identification, we'll have to reassign you to an available seat in the main cabin." "You mean economy," Camila corrected her. "Yes," Yvette said. "I paid for this seat," Camila replied. "I selected it. I arrived on time. And I'm being told that unless I prove my worth, again, I'll be punished for making you uncomfortable." "It's not about comfort," Logan said, but his voice was quieter now. "Yes," Camila said, eyes locked on his. "It is." From across the aisle, the man in 2C, older, white, wearing a crisp cardigan over a dress shirt, cleared his throat and spoke up without being invited. "She's right. I've flown in sweatpants. No one's ever asked me for anything but a drink order." "Sir," Yvette began. "No," he said firmly. I think this is the most uncomfortable I've ever been in first class, and it has nothing to do with her." Logan looked at Yvette, who suddenly seemed unsure of the next step. But Camila didn't wait. "You want to move me?" she asked. "Then go ahead. But I want your names, your employee numbers, and I want this logged. Because you may think this is about a dress code or a clerical error, but I know what this really is. I know exactly what I look like to you. And I also know I'm not leaving this plane ashamed. Not today." Yvette's jaw clenched just slightly, the rehearsed professionalism on her face flickering as the weight of Camila's words sank into the uneasy quiet of the cabin. And for a brief moment, just a second, no one moved. Not the passengers, not the crew, not the silence itself, which stretched tight like the skin of a drum as if daring someone to break it first, until Logan exhaled and said in that polished, customer service voice meant to sound neutral but always landed cold, "Ma'am, we'll reassign your seat and offer compensation for the inconvenience." A line so practiced it rolled off his tongue like a formality, though there was nothing formal about what was happening, nothing procedural about the way 3 flight attendants had surrounded one woman, questioned her twice, and made her defend the right to sit in a seat she had paid for like everyone else. Camila nodded once, slowly, with the kind of resignation that didn't come from defeat but calculation, knowing this wasn't the time or place to dig her heels in, not when there were eyes watching, not when a delay would turn her into the villain in someone else's version of this story, not when the goal wasn't just to win a seat, but to expose the disease beneath the polite surface of it all. "Fine," she said, her voice steady as she reached for her bag. "But I want this documented. Every part of it." Tracy, who had remained mostly silent until now, stepped forward and gestured toward the curtain separating the first-class cabin from the rest of the plane, her smile thin and distant as she said, "We've located a seat for you in main cabin." Like she was doing Camila a favor, like this was generosity and not an erasure, and Camila didn't flinch or look away, didn't let them see her anger even as it simmered beneath the surface, instead rising from her seat with quiet dignity, sliding her book into her bag and standing tall. The passengers watched, some with awkward sympathy, some with tight-lipped discomfort, and others with that blank, polished indifference unique to people who believe that silence absolves them from complicity. As Camila stepped past 2B, past the man in 2C who gave her a faint nod of respect, past Yvette's tense posture and Logan's folded arms, and through the curtain that might as well have been a wall, because once she crossed it, she wasn't a first-class passenger anymore. She was just a black woman in a hoodie being escorted to her proper place. Business-class passengers glanced up as she passed, murmurs rising in the aisle like wind before a storm, a few brows lifted, a couple of phones subtly raised and then lowered again, as if trying to catch just enough of her walk to gossip later without having to engage now. And behind her, the curtain snapped closed with a soft but final sound that made her skin crawl, because she had heard that sound before, in offices, in elevators, in country clubs, in meeting rooms where opportunities were reassigned the moment she walked in. Tracy stopped beside row 23 and gestured to a cramped middle seat between a college-aged guy in a hoodie and an older woman balancing a crossword puzzle on her lap, and Camila didn't speak, didn't ask for anything, didn't even respond when Tracy said, "We apologize for any inconvenience," because the lie was too familiar to bother addressing. She sat down, folded her arms over her chest, and stared at the seat back in front of her, her breath slow, her expression unreadable, and though her body was still, her mind was already moving, collecting, cataloging, preserving the details. Not for revenge, but for truth, because some stories aren't told in the headlines or apology memos, they're carried in memory until the right moment to make them matter. She could feel the stares, the questions burning in the eyes of nearby passengers too afraid to ask but too curious to ignore, and one of them, a younger black woman across the aisle, caught her gaze and gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement. The kind shared by people who've lived through the same unspoken rules and know exactly what it feels like to be both seen and erased in the same breath. Camila looked away slowly, letting her eyes drift toward the window, the Arizona sun sharp and bright beyond the wing of the aircraft, and thought about Nathan, how he would react, what he would say, how he would rage when he found out that his wife, the woman whose judgment he trusted more than most of his board members, had been demoted mid-flight not because she lacked a ticket, not because she broke a rule, but because 3 white flight attendants couldn't reconcile her skin, her clothes, and her seat number. And yet, she wouldn't call him. Not yet. Because this wasn't about rescue. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Rhodes penthouse in downtown Phoenix, casting long streaks across the marble floor and filtered through sheer linen drapes that swayed gently in the early breeze. And though the view from the 42nd floor was breathtaking, Camilla barely glanced at it as she sat on the edge of the bed, sipping tea in the same gray sweatshirt she had worn on Flight 218, her phone beside her untouched. The silence between her and the world. Intentional, calculated, and deliberate. Nathan stood by the mirror, adjusting his tie in smooth, practiced motions, his tall frame wrapped in a perfectly tailored navy suit that spoke power without arrogance, and though he said nothing for a long moment, the tension in his shoulders betrayed the storm he was holding back. "They made you move," he said finally, his voice low, almost controlled, but it carried the sharpness of a man who'd read the flight report, watched the footage from 3 different angles, and heard his wife's story not just in words, but in the spaces between them. Camilla nodded once, then looked at him in the mirror. "They did." Nathan turned slowly. "And you didn't call me?" "I didn't want this to be about the name," she replied calmly. "I wanted to see how far they'd go, how sure they were that I didn't belong." He exhaled, jaw tightening, the line of his mouth rigid with anger he hadn't yet spoken aloud. "Camilla, they humiliated you. They marched my wife down a plane like a problem to be relocated. That's not a system glitch. That's something else." "I know," she said, rising to stand in front of him, resting a hand on his chest, her palm open over the fabric as if anchoring him. "But this isn't about payback. It's about changing the conditions that made 3 employees feel empowered to police a black woman out of first class without hesitation. It's about how quietly this kind of thing happens every day, to people who don't have you as a last name." Nathan searched her face, his own expression shifting, not softening, but understanding, because he knew this wasn't new for Camilla. He had married into her world, not the other way around, and while he had power, she had clarity, and in that moment, he let her lead. "All right," he said. "Your way. Just tell me when." She looked down at her sweatshirt, smoothed it once, and said, "Today." Across town, inside the glass and steel headquarters of Orion Air, the executive conference room buzzed with quiet urgency as department heads filtered in, clutching tablets and coffee cups, their expressions tight with anticipation. The quarterly customer experience review was on the agenda, and this time, the stakes were higher than usual. Dana Whitaker, chief customer officer, stood by the wall-to-wall display screen, reviewing the presentation with a hollow feeling in her gut. The numbers weren't good, and she knew it. Complaints were up. Passenger dissatisfaction, especially on premium routes, had spiked 11% over the past quarter, with a troubling spike in language like unprofessional, rude, and disrespectful. She glanced at her assistant. "The board. All attending in person." And Mr. Rhodes confirmed. Dana stiffened. Nathan Rhodes had owned Orion Air for just under a year, but this would be his first time attending one of these meetings face-to-face. His reputation in the tech industry was carved from iron. Visionary, yes, but allergic to excuses and merciless when standards slipped. His presence alone had executives checking their reports twice. "Make sure Yvette Langston and her first-class team are here," Dana added. "They've had excellent performance scores. We'll need something to show the board that's working." 10 minutes later, Yvette entered the room alongside Logan and Tracy, each dressed in immaculate uniform, their expressions confident, even relaxed, assuming the invitation was a reward, a nod to consistency, a subtle thank you for upholding the brand image of Orion's elite service. "I think they're launching that luxury ambassador program," Logan whispered to Tracy. "About time. Probably rolling it out on transcontinental routes," she murmured back, adjusting her collar. "We'll be front of the line." Yvette gave a soft SHHH as Dana approached the center of the room. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As you know, today we're reviewing our quarterly service metrics and outlining next quarter's experience strategy. We've invited several frontline representatives to join, including members of our first-class crew who have consistently delivered strong service across our premium network." The double doors at the back of the room opened. All heads turned. In stepped Nathan Rhodes, broad-shouldered, calm, and unreadable, as he took his place at the head of the table with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Behind him, unnoticed at first, came Camilla, still in that gray sweatshirt, still silent, still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. She didn't glance at a single person as she took her seat by the glass wall. She didn't have to. Within 10 seconds, every face in the room had turned toward her, and within 10 more, they all understood exactly why they'd been summoned. There was a long, loaded silence, the kind that floods the room before the ground shifts beneath it. And for a moment, no one moved. Not the executives, not the flight crew, not Dana Whitaker, who stood frozen at the front of the room, her presentation remote dangling loosely in one hand, her mouth half open as her eyes flicked from Nathan to Camila and back again, calculating, realizing, bracing. Camila didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence, underdressed, unbothered, undeniably deliberate, spoke volumes before a single word left her mouth, and across the table, Yvette Langston's smile slowly cracked, her confident posture stiffening into something brittle and strained as the pieces began to fall into place. Nathan rose first. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't address the metrics. He looked directly at the 3 flight attendants sitting near the back, Yvette, Logan, Tracy, and said, in a tone so even it made the weight of every syllable undeniable, "Some of you met my wife yesterday." Gasps weren't audible, but the energy in the room fractured instantly, a sharp intake of breath, the ripple of panic tightening like a net around the trio as Tracy's hands twitched nervously in her lap, and Logan straightened in his seat with the reflexive posture of a man trying to look useful while drowning. Camila Rhodes, Nathan continued, flew on Orion Air Flight 218 from Phoenix to Charlotte in Seat 2A. A seat she paid for. A seat she was removed from. Because she didn't look like what you expected. Dana stammered, "Mr. Rhodes, I wasn't aware." "No," he said, his gaze never shifting from the crew. "You weren't. And that's exactly the problem." Yvette opened her mouth, searching for the script, but Camila stood before she could find it. Her voice was soft, controlled, devastating. "You asked me for ID 3 times. You told me there was a system error. You said my presence was inconsistent with the first-class experience. But what you really meant was, you don't look like someone who belongs here." She looked directly at Yvette. "You didn't see a passenger. You saw a threat to the image you were protecting." No one dared interrupt. Camila continued, her eyes sweeping the room. "And I'm not the first. I've spoken to other passengers, people of color, people with disabilities, people traveling alone, people in hoodies, sweatpants, thrift store jackets, who were questioned, delayed, redirected, doubted. Not for breaking rules, but for breaking expectations." Dana reached for a folder, her voice thin. We take feedback seriously." Camila stepped forward. "No, you file it. You categorize it. You bury it. But you don't fix it. Because fixing it would mean confronting the culture that allows it. A culture where 3 trained employees didn't hesitate to humiliate a black woman with a paid first-class ticket while never questioning the man in row 2C wearing gym shorts and AirPods. "We are not here to punish," he said, his voice calm but absolute. "We are here to change. Starting today, Orion Air will launch a mandatory anti-bias training program, developed in partnership with external civil rights advisors, to be completed by every customer-facing employee, from check-in to cockpit." He paused. "There will also be structural changes. Every discrimination-related report will be routed directly to a new oversight committee, led by Camila." That landed like thunder. "And as for you," Camila added, turning to the crew, "you will not be fired. You will spend 3 months working in customer advocacy, answering the very complaints you once helped create. Then 3 more months in economy cabin service. If you learn from that, if your reviews reflect change, you may return. But only then." Then a voice from the board side of the table, Clarence Monroe, chairman, spoke, deep and composed. "Mrs. Rhodes, on behalf of this company, thank you. What you've done here today is more than correction. It's justice. It's leadership." Camila nodded once. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "I came to remind you that respect isn't earned by clothes or titles or skin. It's owed. To everyone. Always." The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. Because the message landed like law. And as Camila and Nathan walked out of the room together, her head high, her sweatshirt unapologetically plain, her skin unapologetically hers, Orion Air was already a different company. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance? Share your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about fairness, Click the like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring stories that remind us what really matters in life. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know.